Have you ever realized that home was never truly the safe place you believed it to be? The story I'm about to tell isn't just about family, it's about the night that shattered everything I ever believed about love, loyalty, and blood. That night, Boston was so cold that my breath turned to white mist even as I stood inside my glass apartment overlooking the harbor. The city glowed like a maze of glass and light, while I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, preparing for a late-night video call with investors from Singapore. The clock on the wall read 10:07 p.m. I was reviewing the revenue forecast when 3 knocks hit the door sharp, deliberate, like someone convinced they owned every space they entered. Before I could react, the door opened. My father, Martin Hayes, stepped in wearing a gray wool coat, his face red from the cold and from the kind of confidence that had long become second nature. Beside him was my mother, Vivian, wrapped in a cream overcoat, her leather gloves still on. No greeting. No question about whether I was busy. Only a cold, commanding gaze and a thick folder he dropped onto my desk, making my wine glass tremble. "I need $1 million by tomorrow," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to freeze the 40-square-meter room. "And don't be late." I looked up, keeping my polite corporate smile. "For what purpose, father?" Before he could respond, my mother cut in, her tone even and dry, as if reading the evening news. "It's for your sister, Sophie. She's in trouble. Family helps each other." They stood across from me like 2 judges who had already agreed on a verdict. My father pulled a chair and sat down across from me, resting his elbows on the desk. "You've heard about her crypto investments, haven't you? They want their money back. If we don't pay by Monday, they'll sue. And then the family's reputation will be destroyed. You work in finance, you understand that better than anyone." I took a sip of wine, the bitterness spreading across my tongue. $1 million. Tomorrow, is that an order? He looked at me with a thin smile. "Don't play the moral card. We raised you, sent you to Harvard, gave you everything. Now it's your turn to do your part." My mother folded her arms and tilted her head. "Family isn't a company, Clara. When one person falls, the others carry the weight." I leaned back, feeling the chill of the glass wall behind me seep through my skin. "You didn't come here to ask, you came to command." My father didn't deny it. He gave a slight tilt of his chin, as if my silence already meant agreement. "I don't have time for your pride, Clara. You've helped Sophie before. This is no different. She's your sister." I looked at him, seeing in his reflection the man I once believed was a hero now reduced to a debt collector in an expensive coat. "And what if I refuse?" I asked. He leaned forward, his voice cold and heavy as steel. "Then they'll come for me, and when they do, I'll tell them the person who co-signed the documents was you." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't yet understand what he meant, but instinct told me there was something unclean buried in that stack of papers. I turned the wine glass slowly between my fingers and said quietly, "So, besides love, you now have paperwork as a weapon." My mother frowned, her tone sharper. "Don't talk like that, Clara. You always turn everything into drama. This is simple, a family helps each other through hard times. You just need to transfer the money, that's all." I looked at them, one after the other. The warm yellow light of the room fell across their faces untouched by pain, only calculation and pride. Strangely, I felt calm. No anger, no trembling, just a hollow stillness in my chest. And inside that emptiness, I heard myself say, "All right." My father leaned back slightly, nodding, thinking he had just won another familiar battle. My mother exhaled with relief. "Good, we'll come back tomorrow at noon. The sooner the better." I nodded, still smiling. "Come collect it tomorrow," I said. The words sounded simple enough, so simple that neither of them noticed the look in my eyes as I poured myself another glass of wine. They left without looking back, just like they always did after getting what they came for. When the door clicked shut, the apartment grew so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood up, walked to the table, and looked at the folder they had left behind. A small laugh escaped me. Inside, I felt a strange mix of bitterness and clarity, like the cold wind outside had just swept through the room, clearing away the last traces of illusion. I still remember the house in Cambridge so vividly, the cream-painted walls, the windows glowing with warm yellow light every evening, as if our family were the very picture of harmony, success, and comfort. In every photo hanging along the hallway, my father stood in the center, my mother's head tilted gently against his shoulder, and Sophie always stood close beside them, smiling brightly. I was in the photos too, though usually half cut off or standing slightly out of frame, as if someone always forgot to adjust the lens to fit me in. My father liked everything to look perfect, and my mother knew exactly how to make it appear that way even when nothing beneath it was ever truly peaceful. As a child, I grew used to the soft yet cutting comparisons. Sophie's more sensitive, she needs encouragement. Clara's strong, she'll be fine. Every time I brought home good grades, my father would just nod, then turn to ask Sophie if she wanted to celebrate. But when Sophie cried over a poor grade, the whole house would turn into an emotional rescue unit, and my role was to stay silent so I wouldn't make things worse. I grew up as the gatekeeper, the one who knew how to step back so others could be loved. When I was 16, my mother lost her teaching job after the school downsized. That evening she cried in the kitchen, and my father slammed his hand on the table. "You should have planned better. We still have Sophie's tuition to think about." I quietly washed the dishes, then the next morning, applied for a part-time job at a cafe near school. When I got my first paycheck, just $200, I bought Sophie the dress she'd been dreaming of, so my mother wouldn't have to worry. My mother smiled at me and said the familiar phrase, "Family is about sharing." Back then, I thought it was something noble. Later, I learned that in our family, sharing meant they took, and I gave, and love was never divided evenly. Sophie was always the princess of light. She cried beautifully, smiled sweetly, and knew exactly how to make people want to protect her. When I was 18 and she was 14, my father said in front of the whole family, "My two daughters, one is the brain, and the other is the heart. And it's the heart that keeps this family alive." I smiled, but inside, I heard the soft click of an invisible door closing. From that moment on, I knew my intelligence only had value when it served others, never when it served myself. When Sophie was expelled in her sophomore year for being unsuited to academic pressure, I was finishing my final year at Harvard. My mother called me, her voice tired and sad. "Your sister can't handle it, dear. Help her, will you? She wants to transfer to an art program in San Diego, but the tuition is too high." I wired her $40,000, the money I'd saved from my research assistant job, and received a quick, "You're amazing," in return, so quick it sounded rehearsed. 3 months later, Sophie posted a photo on Instagram, bright smile, captioned, "Living my dream." No one in that picture mentioned me. When I started my first job at an investment firm, the pay wasn't much, but I managed to buy a small apartment in Somerville. My father visited, looked around, and sniffed. Small, but clean. Sophie showed up a few days later, sitting on my sofa with tears in her eyes after a breakup. I made her warm milk, listened to her talk, and the next morning helped pay off her overdue credit card bill. From that day on, I became the family's 24/7 rescue line. Every time Sophie called, my mother would follow up with, "She didn't want to bother you, but things are really tough right now. Family is about sharing, Clara." And again, I transferred the money without a single question. Then came the biggest collapse, the crypto investment disaster of 2020. Sophie launched a project called SophieCoin, partnering with a shady startup group in Miami. My parents didn't understand a thing about blockchain, but they proudly bragged, "Our daughter's a tech entrepreneur." I tried to warn her, but Sophie just laughed. "You live in the old world, Clara. I'm building the future." 3 months later, the project crashed. Sophie faced a class action lawsuit, and my parents sat in the living room, pale and speechless. "How much are they asking for?" I said. My father replied without looking at me. "About 400,000. But you know what that means. Family has to get through this together." I transferred the money within 2 days, thinking I was protecting the family's reputation. When it was done, I emailed Sophie, telling her I hoped she would learn something from it. She replied with a single line, "Thanks, sis. Coffee sometime? That coffee never happened. Years passed, and everything became a pattern. Sophie made a mistake. My parents explained it away, and I paid. My father began using the word duty, while my mother preferred sacrifice. They told their friends I was resilient and dependable, as if it were a compliment. But to me, it was a sentence. I wasn't allowed to be tired. I wasn't allowed to fail. I was the strong one, which meant the one who didn't need love. I still remember my 30th birthday. I organized a small dinner at an Italian restaurant in downtown Boston. I invited the whole family, booked a table for 8, and pre-selected a fine bottle of red wine. Sophie arrived an hour late, sobbing after a fight with her boyfriend. My mother comforted her. My father stepped outside to take a call. And I sat alone in front of a cake whose candles had almost melted away. When the waiter asked if I wanted him to light them again, I smiled and said, no need. Maybe they were never lit at all. Now, when I think back, I don't feel angry. I only see a series of habits I allowed to take root. I carried, they leaned. I stayed silent, they spoke. I paid, they spent. And every time they repeated, family is about sharing, what I heard was, you were born to save us. And perhaps that was the moment I stopped being part of the family and started becoming myself. I sat down at my desk, turned on every light, and pulled the folder closer as if drawing in one final confirmation of what I had long suspected but refused to face. The first page bore a cold, printed line. Liability reserve, payment required. Before 12 p.m. Beneath it were Sophie's name, the case code, and a list of creditors, a table of contents for her mistakes. I flipped through each page, the paper heavy in my hands, the sharp scent of fresh ink stinging my nose. Every sheet felt like a slap. Short-term loan agreements, advance contracts, black card receipts, all bound together by one common thread, the guarantor's signature, Martin Hayes. All in. I exhaled slowly, thinking at least he had the decency to take responsibility for his daughter. But then, on page 17, my eyes froze. There it was, a clean, confident line of text. Co-signer, Clara Hayes. I leaned closer, turned another page. Again, co-signer, Clara Hayes. On another document, the signature resembled mine but poorly imitated the upward curve of the C2 round, the H missing the tiny hook my hand always made without thinking. I had never signed these. I had never been asked. I had never even been mentioned. At the edge of the page, a note read, authorization confirmed via email, July 3. I searched my memory. July 3rd, I was in Lisbon, attending a conference, time zones apart. My inbox was flooded with invitations. If there had been an authorization, someone else had written it, replied for me, or simply forged my name through an old, unused email account. I moved the cursor, opened my mail app, and searched for the keywords. Authorization, consent, Sophie. Nothing. Empty or irrelevant. Except for one unsent draft from 2 years ago, unsigned and unfinished, containing only a single line. I approve Chach. No recipient, no timestamp. I stared at it the way one stares at a knife hidden beneath a napkin. The first surge of anger rose up, then I put it out myself. I was familiar with the fire inside me and knew how to cut off its oxygen. I stood and walked to the window. Boston glowed below, the streets like circuitry, the harbor lights blinking in steady rhythm. In that cold light, everything became clear. They didn't just want my money. They had used my name like a keycard, swiping through every financial gate when needed so they could step cleanly past the consequences and leave the dust clinging to my back. I thought of the countless times I'd heard, family is about sharing. What exactly had they shared, other than roles assigned to me, the guarantor, the cleaner, the wallet, the silent one? I touched the glass, a thin mist collecting beneath my fingertips, cool to the touch. That chill sobered me more than any coffee could. Anger is loud and burns. Decisions are quiet and freeze. I realized I had reached the end of the slope of conditional love and was standing on the solid concrete of a single truth. An ending is not an escape. It is leaving a prison without walls. I went back to the desk, opened my laptop, and logged into a private admin environment only I knew how to reach. Two-factor authentication, a one-time code, a fingerprint scan. The dashboard appeared like a battle map, with buttons labeled Hold, Revoke, Transfer, Audit. I opened an intermediary account that had been dormant for 2 years and checked the access logs clean, no strange footprints. I typed an email to Natalie Hart, the one who had held my hand through my toughest divestment and who asked me a year ago, "Are you planning to be the family's bill payer forever?" Subject line: Phase 3, Separation Protocol. The body contained only a few lines, but each word was a brick I laid to build a bridge to the other side. Natalie, activate Phase 3 immediately. Revoke all authorizations bearing Hayes attached to my name. Remove signing authority from any structure that includes Martin Hayes. Immediately audit all instances of cosigner referencing Clara Hayes within the last 36 months. Lock every payment gate they could possibly touch. Schedule e-signing before 8 a.m. Do not respond to any of their calls. I paused, then added one sentence. This is not running. This is exiting a prison without walls. Then I hit send. Natalie replied in 7 minutes, exactly her style. Received. Phase 3 activated. DocuSign scheduled for 7:15 a.m. I'll run a full cosigner audit through Pacer divided by CRA. Warning, if there's forgery, we retain full counterclaim rights. Power down your system. Let me handle the rest. I smiled for the first time that long night. I felt I truly had an ally. The Boston sky was thick with fog that night, a heavy curtain draped over the city. The yellow streetlights outside cast their glow onto my reflection in the window, tired, but frighteningly clear-eyed. There were no tears, only the cold focus of someone who no longer believed she owed anyone anything. The wind slipped through the cracks of the window frame, making a soft rustling sound like pages turning in that same cursed folder. I sat back down, opened my laptop, my fingers moving automatically precise, steady as if my body had been training for this night all along. Step 1 of the plan. Revoke the authorization my father had secretly attached to my investment account. In 2018, he'd called it a precaution, in case I was ever abroad and needed someone to sign on my behalf. I believed him then because back then, I still thought father was a title that came with trust. Now I opened the bank's internal system and navigated to Authorized Access. His name appeared there, Martin Hayes. Status: active since 2018. I stared at it for a long moment, then hovered over the button that read, Revoke Access. One click. The screen flashed, authorization revoked. I didn't sigh in relief, but inside, I heard a faint metallic snap like a lock breaking somewhere deep within me. Step 2. Transfer all shares of the startup I co-founded into a private, anonymous trust. This wasn't impulsive. I had created that trust 2 years earlier, under a separate legal entity, in case I ever needed to detach my assets from family entanglements. I logged into the management system, entered my two-factor code, then executed the full share transfer from the parent company, Crestline Strategies, LLC, to Arbor Trust, Delaware. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure you want to transfer full ownership? I typed yes and signed electronically. On the screen, the words ownership updated appeared like a verdict being read aloud. I straightened up, looked out the window, and saw the first snow begin to fall. Each flake small, silent, deliberate, covering everything it touched, just like what I was doing with my life. Step 3. Revoke my parents' use of the apartment they still automatically listed as their contact address for mail and social dealings. I used to think it was harmless, but now I see it for what it was, the last visible string they used to keep me tied. I logged into the residency system and submitted a request to change my official mailing address to a secure P.O. box in Back Bay 1. I had privately rented for legal documents. I deleted the old address and revoked Martin and Vivian's authorization to receive forwarded mail. A confirmation message from the delivery service arrived. All mail forwarding has been terminated. I read that line 3 times. Terminated. The word sounded both cold and liberating. The clock read 2:10 a.m. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the low hum of the heater. I stood, opened the cabinet, and took out a walnut box I had bought in Vermont last fall. Back then, I'd meant it to hold old letters and a few photos of my mother from her younger days. But tonight, it would serve a different purpose to seal away every debt I never agreed to carry. I placed the box on the table and wiped it with a dry cloth. The scent of the wood mingled with the chill of the night air, creating something both calm and unyielding. I began gathering the documents. The first thing I took was the record of every transfer I'd ever made for Sophie over the past 10 years, a list so long it almost didn't feel real. I printed each page: $40,000 for tuition, $25,000 for her art program, $400,000 for the crypto crisis, plus dozens of smaller sums: rent, health insurance, credit cards. Every number was a fragment of memory, every transaction a moment when I chose silence over self-protection. I bound them together and labeled the folder: Transactions, 2013 to 2023. When I placed the stack into the box, the sound was low and heavy, as if the wood itself could feel the weight of a decade drained away. Next came the bank statements showing that Martin had forged my signature to secure a loan. Natalie had sent the original scans from the legal database 2 hours earlier, along with a brief note: keep for counterclaim protection. I printed them out, each page stamped with a digital seal. The forged signatures were almost laughably crude, the work of a man so certain no one would ever dare check him that he didn't bother to be careful. I placed the pages into a separate envelope, sealed it, and wrote on the front: proof of forgery. As I wrote those 3 words, my hand didn't shake. I only felt my heartbeat slow and steady, like someone finally emerging from a fever. The third item was a small silver USB drive containing a recording from 2021, the day my father told a business partner, "If anything goes wrong, I'll pin it all on Clara, she can take it." I still remember sitting in the conference room, overhearing it because of a connection glitch that broadcast his voice through the speaker system. At first, I thought I'd misheard, but the recording was automatically saved in the backup system, and I kept a copy. Not for revenge, but as a reminder of the real voice of the man who once taught me that strength means staying silent. I placed the USB inside the box, between the folders, like a dagger hidden in paper. And finally, I wrote a check for exactly $1, signed my real name neatly, and in the memo line, I wrote, "Final family payment." As the ink sank into the paper, it felt like signing the final page of a ledger 15 years long. $1, not too much to seem mocking, not too little to be mistaken for a joke. Just enough to make clear that the account was closed, paid in full, with my life as the balance. When everything was in place inside the box, I took a blank sheet of paper and, with slow, precise strokes, wrote, "You always wanted to prove I was heartless. Now I'm simply playing the role you wrote for me." I placed it on top, folding the upper right corner so it would be the first thing they saw when the box was opened. I imagined my father's face reading those words. Maybe he'd laugh with disdain, maybe he'd slam the table, or maybe he'd just throw the box away. None of that mattered anymore. The message wasn't for them to understand, it was for me, a confirmation that I no longer had to play the good daughter in their script. I sealed the box with clear tape, folding the edges neatly. As the scissors sliced through the tape, I was struck by the memory of the last time I'd heard that sound, the year I helped my father pack his company's financial records during the 2008 crisis. I was 20 then, still believing I was helping him weather the storm. Now, it was the same sound, the same motion, but this time I wasn't sealing the box to protect him. I was burying everything he'd ever used to keep me bound. The clock read 3:47 a.m. I pulled the curtains aside, the snow was still falling, and the city was wrapped in rare silence. The harbor lights shimmered on the water like thin sheets of metal. I sat down, poured myself another glass of wine, not to get drunk, just to feel warm. The walnut box sat on the table, the lamp reflecting off its surface in an amber glow, elegant, distant, cold. In that moment, I finally understood why people say true freedom doesn't come from running away, but from knowing you've done everything you needed to do. Nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. I picked up my phone and sent Natalie a short message. All set. Leaving tomorrow. She replied with just 2 words. About time. I laughed. Yes, it was time. I pulled out my suitcase and began to pack. Every item I chose belonged to the life I was beginning, not the one I was leaving behind. A few simple outfits, my laptop, a notebook, my passport, and a small silver-framed photo of my mother. I added a bottle of cedarwood perfume because I loved the scent, not because anyone else did. When I closed the suitcase, I looked around the apartment, once a shrine to all the obligations I'd carried alone. Now it would hold the box, as a silent witness to everything that had ever been taken from me. By morning, as the Boston sky still wore the steely hue of winter, I rolled my suitcase to the door. The wheels clicked softly over the tiles, each sound a steady, deliberate breath, the rhythm of someone walking away from a long war without needing to announce victory. The cold air stung my face, but I didn't turn back. I walked straight to the basement, where a rental car was already waiting. On the passenger seat lay an e-ticket to Charleston, South Carolina, a destination absent from every itinerary my family had ever known. As the car pulled out of Back Bay, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The glass tower in the distance caught the first light of dawn, its smooth windows reflecting the sun as if they had never held a single memory. That building had once been my home, or more accurately, the container for every obligation they had wrapped in the name of love. I smiled, the first smile in years untouched by bitterness. Home? I whispered, my voice dissolving into the hum of the engine. Or just a trap made of glass. I rolled down the window and let the wind rush in. The city began to fade behind me, the bank buildings where I used to work, the street where I once drove Sophie to school when my mother was too busy, the cafe where I waited 2 hours for my father only to hear him say, "I had a meeting." All of it shrank in the mirror, like an old dream unraveling. When the car merged onto the highway toward Logan Airport, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Dad. I watched it ring, then go dark, strangely calm. A message followed, don't run. Family doesn't abandon its own. I set the phone on the seat and smiled faintly. Some people only use the word family when they need someone to play the victim for them. At Logan Airport, crowds moved in waves, hurried and anonymous. I checked in with a new passport and ID under a different legal identity Natalie had arranged for me long ago. Clara W. Hart. Clean documents, no ties to any Hayes records. The woman at the counter smiled and asked, "Business or pleasure, Miss Hart?" I replied, "A little of both." The words sounded light, but I knew inside this was the first journey of my life that wasn't about chasing or escaping anyone. I was simply going toward myself. On the plane, as the wheels lifted off the ground, I leaned back and watched Boston grow smaller beneath me. The frozen rivers cut across the gray rooftops like cracks in an old mirror. I exhaled softly, not out of regret, but because in that single moment, I understood I was truly free. No one calling my name to demand something. No one insisting I help. No one warning me not to embarrass the family. Just the sky and the sound of the engine, steady, powerful, honest. 3 hours later, when the plane landed in Charleston, the air was warmer, humid, touched with the faint scent of salt. I rented a small silver car and drove out of the airport toward the Ashley River, the one my mother once mentioned in an old postcard. The water there is green as glass, and people live slowly. I rented a small riverside house with a brown-tiled roof, a wooden porch, and 2 old oak trees shading the front yard. The windows faced the water, where fishing boats drifted by like floating sparks in the afternoon light. No one knew this address. No friends, no colleagues, and certainly no family. I set my suitcase down and opened the windows, letting the breeze fill the empty space. The house was silent except for the sound of water and distant birds. I took out my phone and called Natalie. "I'm here," I said. "Don't answer them. If they call, tell them I'm in Europe, Geneva, maybe. They'll believe it." My father always believed a woman's freedom could only exist abroad. Natalie chuckled softly through the line. "Understood, they won't find you." "But Clara, Once you start your new life, don't look back, alright? I replied quietly. Natalie, I already burned the map. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles north in Boston, Martin and Vivian Hayes stood at the door of my apartment. The wind blew hard, carrying flecks of snow. My mother wore a thick fur coat, her face powdered carefully despite the freezing air. My father, in his gray suit, looked exactly as he always did, confident, hurried, convinced he was still in control. He pressed the doorbell once. Twice. No answer. Irritated, he pounded on the door. Clara, he shouted. We had an agreement. Open up. My mother glanced around, her voice trembling from cold and unease. Maybe she went to the bank. I told you we should have called first. Martin snapped. She wouldn't dare go anywhere. She's just sulking. I know her. But when he looked down, the first thing he saw wasn't the familiar doormat, it was a walnut box, placed neatly on the front step. On the lid of the box, written clearly in black ink under the porch light, were the words, "For Martin and Vivian Hayes." The handwriting was slanted, precise, unmistakably mine. My mother bent down and touched the box. It was ice cold. Maybe it's a check, she murmured, her voice softening as if to calm herself. Martin looked around, his lips pressed tight. He lifted the box. It was heavier than he expected. She left this. As a joke? He muttered, and just as he started to open it, a small note slipped from the edge of the tape. Please open together. The lid clicked open with a dry snap, a sound sharp and precise, like a needle brushing the eardrum. The air filled with the scent of printed paper, the faint resin of walnut wood, and a trace of my old perfume still lingering on the envelopes because I'd held them too long before setting them down. The mix was strange, intimate, suffocating. Martin adjusted his glasses, leaning over as his thumb ran along the edge of the thick folder labeled Transactions. 2013 to 2023. Vivian stood just behind him, one hand clutching her fur collar, the other gripping the edge of the table, as if balance were a privilege reserved for other people. The sound of turning pages filled the glass-walled room, first the rustle of plastic sleeves, then the soft scrape of paper against the tabletop. Numbers appeared in columns and rows. 40,000 for art tuition, 25,000 emergency advance, 400,000 crypto settlement, and countless smaller payments, a lifetime tallied up in fragments of just helping out. Vivian's breath came faster, short and uneven, equal parts anger, shame, and the desperate urge to shove the whole pile onto the floor so the world could go back to pretending. Martin flipped faster now, chasing a mistake as if he could outrun it. Then, on the 11th page, something slipped from the binder and rolled softly across the glass. A small black voice recorder, no bigger than 2 fingers, its light blinking once blue. He froze for a heartbeat, then pressed play. The room, with all its glass and silence, filled instantly with my voice, calm, steady, and cutting enough to make the walls seem to stand at attention. Mom. Dad. You've always said family is everything. But did you ever ask if I was still a person in it? There's no money in this box. Only the things I've paid for 15 years. If you're looking for who's to blame, try the mirror. Vivian let out a sharp cry, not the long, dramatic wail of a stage actress, but a short, high-pitched sound, the kind that escapes when someone is suddenly stripped of control over the story. She's lecturing us now? Who does she think she is, preaching like that? She spat, the words tumbling out too fast, the phrase lecturing us breaking loose like an old reflex of defense. Martin didn't answer. The corner of his mouth twitched, taut like a guitar string pulled too tight. He reached for the second stack of papers, the thick envelope stamped in blue ink. Proof of forgery. He tore it open, the edge sliced his finger, leaving a thin red line of blood, but he didn't notice. Inside were the statements and side-by-side images of the signatures. On the left, my real one, the C beginning with a fine hook, the H compact but with a small curve at its base. On the right, the signature that bore my name on the mortgage contract, a rounded C, an H missing its hook, the entire name leaning upward like a lie told in a cold room. Martin stared at those dead strokes of ink for a long time, his face drained of color. He pulled another page. Authorization via email, 7/3, a blurred screenshot, the phrase, "I approve" without header, without metadata, a line printed purely for show. He wasn't a fool, he knew immediately what kind of evidence melted on contact with scrutiny. "Oh God," he murmured, the two words dropping heavy and hollow, like stones sinking into a bottomless well. Vivian reached out and yanked another file. The first page slipped free of its clip and fell face down. She bent to pick it up, flipped it over a printed screenshot of an email, subject line. Shortfall coverage. The sender, Martin Hayes. The message read, "Don't worry, Clara will cover it. The girl owes us for life." The phrase "owes us for life" was bolded, underlined, as if someone had enlarged it to make sure it could never be unseen. Vivian's face changed color not from shock at the content, but from the sudden realization that, for the first time, the outside world could see how they spoke when the doors were closed. "When did you send this?" she asked quietly, her voice unsteady, as though something had just been pulled out from under her feet. Martin didn't reply. He only stared at the paper as if it were the dead body of his own mistake. Then, in one motion, he grabbed the box, suddenly violent, like a man losing his last weapon, lifted it, and slammed it back down. The lid struck the edge of the glass table with a harsh, echoing crack. Envelopes burst open. The $1 check slid across the surface, spun twice, and came to rest at the edge like a tired coin. "Enough!" he roared, but it was no longer the commanding voice of the man who once gave orders. It was the raw, ragged sound of someone hearing his sentence read aloud. The tiny speaker hadn't stopped yet. My voice continued calm, even mercilessly composed. "I didn't leave money, because money never cured greed. I left the invoices, every amount, every signature, every time you called it sharing when it was really taking. If you want to say my name, then start by naming what you did to it." "Ah." Vivian let out a brittle laugh, waving her hand in the air as if she could swipe the sound away. "She's performing. That's all this is. She loves making everything dramatic. Families talk things out, they don't turn them into theater." Her words were defensive, automatic, but her eyes didn't leave the bolded lines. Then she snapped toward Martin. "You promised me everything was handled. You said, 'Don't worry.' Well, now what?" Martin sank slowly onto the edge of the chair, head bowed, dabbing the thin line of blood on his finger with a handkerchief. The small, clumsy motion made him, for the first time, look less like a title and more like a man. "I thought she'd do what she always did," he said quietly, so honest that it emptied the room. "I thought she could handle it." Handle it. The phrase echoed through the air, hollow, metallic, like an empty can rolling across the floor. For a rare moment, silence found its way into the room, not the kind that waits for orders, but the kind that comes when shame finally arrives. Vivian looked around as if the furniture might defend her, the wine glass still bearing my lipstick, the cardigan folded neatly on the chair, the vase of tulips bending at the stem. She reached for the $1 check, her hand trembling as if it were too hot to touch. $1, she muttered. "She thinks $1 is what? An insult?" My voice answered her from the speaker, as though anticipating the question. $1 isn't a joke. It's a settlement. My final payment for the role you wrote for me. The rest, I'm keeping for myself." Martin stood abruptly, striding to the window, yanking the curtains open as if trying to let the room breathe again. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, steady, patient. He placed his hand against the cold glass, inhaled deeply, then turned back. His eyes were a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. And for just a moment, I could imagine the hollow inside him, the place where all his "she'll do it, and she can take it" had just fallen through. The tiny speaker in the Boston apartment played its final message. My voice was lower now, almost a whisper. "If you ever loved me for who I was, not for the function of what I could endure, then starting tomorrow, don't knock on my door. Knock on the mirror." Vivian pressed her lips together, a small tremor tightening the bridge of her nose. Suddenly, she reached out, hurriedly gathering the papers with shaky hands. Put them away, all of them. Don't let anyone see. Martin slowly shook his head. No more hiding. End of text. He looked straight at the family photo on the wall, the one where, for years, I stood slightly off-center, cropped by a fraction as if I'd never quite fit. For the first time, perhaps, he understood that the imbalance wasn't the photographer's fault. He walked over, took the frame down, and laid it face down on the table, the glass landing with a soft clink. For most of his life, he believed that as long as every object was returned to its proper place, everything else would fall back to normal. But normal was a bridge long burned. The next morning in Charleston, I woke to a pale light, soft as silk steeped in mist. I made coffee in the small kitchen, listening to the sound of river water brushing the wooden posts beneath the porch like a new clock that belonged only to this place. I didn't reach for my phone right away. I wanted to stretch the quiet a little longer, to let the warmth of the coffee travel from the cup to my throat without interruption from the world I'd left behind. But peace, for someone who has just defused the bomb inside their chest, never lasts long, not once the world realizes the blast was meant to take down the whole block. When I finally turned my phone over, the screen lit up with a flood of notifications. An email from Natalie in all caps, texts from unknown numbers, missed calls from Dad stacked like steps, and links to news articles sent by a former colleague, each one tagged with a small flame emoji. I opened Natalie's email first, scanning the clipped, sharp sentences. Efficient, no frills. Leak confirmed. Financial Times, Boston. Hayes Construction under investigation for guarantee fraud and hidden debts. Board suspended Martin pending audit. Vivian removed from community board for conflict of interest. Sophie being pulled into influencer fraud coverage. Do not respond to press. I'm handling it. I set the phone down on the wooden table and listened to my heartbeat, steady, deliberate, like oars dipping into the river. Not faster, not slower. Just a new rhythm, no longer marching in step with anyone else's. I opened one of the links. The article appeared in the measured tone of financial journalism, neutral on the surface, but every sentence weighed like lead. Sources close to the matter confirm the company used questionable guarantee mechanisms to conceal shortfalls in several housing projects. Certain co-signer signatures are currently under verification. They didn't name me, but I could see myself in the blank spaces in the silhouette of a co-signer turned into a switch someone else flipped to control risk. A short paragraph mentioned the family of Mr. Martin Hayes, accompanied by a photo of Sophie smiling in a glittering gown at a charity event, the flash lighting her face in cold edges of white and silver. Below the article, reader comments scrolled endlessly, a mix of must be nice, rich people problems, and a few sharper voices questioning internal accountability. Outside, the river kept moving, calm and salty, while on the screen, the storm began to gather. By noon, Natalie sent another message. Board voted to suspend Martin. Acting control handed to CFO for audit oversight. Vivian removed from education board pending review. 2 major outlets requested interviews, decline both. I'll handle press if needed. Please keep your phone off for family. I typed back one word, done, and locked the screen. A sudden knock startled me, but it was only the landlord bringing the official rental agreement, asking if I needed an extra blanket because the river wind gets cold at night. I signed my name, Clara W. Hart, thanked him, and accepted the spare key attached to a worn leather strap. Maybe it was the first time in years I had signed my name on something that bound me to no one but myself. By late afternoon, the sunlight in Charleston pulled back from the porch, leaving a warm gold shimmer over the water. I sat with an old book, not a particularly good one, reading a page, stopping, reading again, until my phone buzzed. This time it was a social media notification, a short compilation video of Sophie through the years, titled From Perfect Goddess to Financial Scandal. I didn't want to watch it, but my finger moved anyway. The video played a bright, chirpy narration, the kind used for celebrity gossip reels, accompanied by rolling comments. Where did the money come from? Time to pay up. Wasn't her sister the finance one? I stopped it halfway through. What I felt wasn't anger or pity, just a deep, ancient kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes from seeing the same story told wrong, by the wrong people, for the wrong reasons. The same stage, the same audience, except this time, I wasn't waiting in the wings, holding props, preparing to clean up the scene again. When the phone rang once more, the name flashing on the screen was the only thing that could have pulled me from my chair. Sophie. I let it ring once through, then answered without speaking. The sound of crying burst through, raw, messy, familiar. Clara, I don't know what's happening, Sophie sobbed, her voice breaking between gasps. The press is destroying me, people online are brutal, my friends won't pick up, the brands canceled everything, Mom says I shouldn't go out, and Dad won't even answer his phone. Please, tell them I'm innocent. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them the signature thing isn't about me. Please. Her breath came through the line in short, frantic waves, childlike, desperate, like so many nights before. I leaned against the door frame, staring at the oak trees swaying in the river breeze, tracing the veins in its bark just to keep my eyes from clinging to her words. In that small silence, I heard echoes of myself 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even last year. Every time I would reach for my wallet, scramble to transfer money, write explanations, call reporters, negotiate damage, soothe panic, and accept a hurried thank you, followed by a promise so thin it could evaporate under a single day of sunlight. But here, by the river, with the smell of salt and moss reminding me of things that endure longer than guilt, I finally spoke, my voice calm, almost foreign to my own ears. I'm not your lawyer anymore, Sophie. The line went silent, as if someone had pulled the plug from the wall. Then Sophie broke down harder. What do you mean? You've always been the one who saves me. You can't just, I'll die, Clara, they'll eat me alive. I just need you to say one thing, just one thing, that I'm not bad. I closed my eyes, letting the wind move through my hair. Sophie, I said slowly, I know you're scared, but your fear isn't my plan to fix anymore. I don't explain for anyone now. If you need a lawyer, I'll send you Natalie's contact. If you need someone to cry with, then maybe the best thing you can do is cry it out and get up. I'm not the life raft anymore. End of sentence. I heard her swallow through her tears, a sharp pause, like the silence between two bolts of lightning. You're cruel, she whispered weakly. Don't you love me anymore? I didn't answer that question because it was wrong from the foundation up. I only said, I'm going to hang up now. Don't call again. When you're ready to talk like two adults, not like the savior and the saved, send an email. And I ended the call. I stood there for a while, comforted only by the sound of the river. Water never gets angry, it just moves. Hanging up on Sophie didn't turn me into someone new. It simply brought me back to the one person I hadn't been in years, the woman who no longer borrowed the identity of the one who can handle it just to stay alive. No fireworks. No soundtrack. Just two soft words, like an exhale. It's done. Late in the afternoon, Natalie called from her private number. Her voice was steady and dry, the kind of tone doctors use when delivering test results while draining their own emotions so the patient doesn't drown in panic. The internal briefing's done, Martin's suspended, the CFO is acting interim, and the audit begins immediately. Vivian's been removed from the education board. Official reason: to ensure impartiality. Their legal team reached out, polite tone, but between the lines they're asking for a family resolution. I declined. As for Sophie, her team's in crisis, brands have pulled contracts. Do you want to make a statement? I watched the water turn to steel as the sun went down, thinking how my name might appear in headlines not because of my fault, but because of the bridge that once carried it, the one others drove their trucks across. No, I said. Let my silence answer their questions. Natalie gave a faint, approving chuckle. Silence that solid? I like it. Then she paused for a beat. Clara, are you okay? For the first time in that call, a smile reached my lips. I'm fine, I said softly. I'm learning that emptiness doesn't have to be frightening. When night fully settled, I turned on the small porch light. A swarm of tiny insects circled the glow like stray thoughts around a decision long since made. I opened the file labeled Day 1 and typed a few lines. Aftermath isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's cleanup, a heavy rain washing the yard. If someone gets wet, it doesn't mean the rain hates them. Then I closed the laptop, slipped on thick socks, and poured myself another drink. The phone buzzed again, maybe Sophie, maybe my father, maybe a reporter wanting to hear my side. I let it ring. For the first time, I chose silence over saving someone. And in that silence, I heard something round and full myself. Charleston night lay still as paper, broken only by crickets and the rhythmic slap of river water against the wooden posts. I sat on the porch alone, holding a cup of tea gone cold. The sky was moonless, with only the faint glow from a neighbor's house stretching across the yard just enough to catch the ripples spreading over the dark water. I don't play music before bed anymore. Silence is the only sound I want. I was just about to go inside when the phone on the table vibrated softly. The screen lit up with a string of unfamiliar numbers, no name, no recognizable area code. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed answer. Clara? A pause. The voice was hoarse, uneven as if it had traveled through too much dust before reaching me. It's your father. I froze, my fingers tightening around the phone. It felt like someone had opened an old door inside my chest, one I thought I had locked forever. There was no sound of my mother, no background noise, not even wind on his end, only his heavy, uneven breathing, and the voice that once commanded me as if it could command the world. Now it was weak, scraped raw, but honest. He hesitated. You destroyed this family. But you were right. I sat down, drawing a deep breath. Each word he spoke dropped like a pebble into water, sending slow, widening ripples. The company's gone, he continued, his voice quieter, as though afraid someone might overhear. The board voted. They replaced me. Your mother's trying to salvage our reputation, but people don't forgive. And Sophie, he stopped, his breath stretching thin, as if pressing against a truth he didn't want to release. Sophie's gone. No one knows where. They say she left the city with an old friend, probably hiding from the press. I listened, saying nothing. The wind from the river slipped through my sweater, cool against my skin. I pulled the collar higher and stared out at the water. I'm not surprised, I said slowly. It was always going to happen. Not because I left, but because you still believed everything only existed if you were the one in control. He didn't respond at first. Then his voice returned, faint and uneven, the voice of a man who'd just come through a fever. When I was young, he said, I told your mother, we have to raise her to be strong. But I forgot to learn how to love someone strong. His words fell into the night like a stone dropped into a deep well. My throat tightened. Maybe it was the first time he had ever said something true, something without an agenda, without a goal. I leaned back against the porch column, eyes tracing the dense black sky. Dad, I said softly, I don't need you to apologize, I just need you to wake up. Alman. Silence on the other end. I heard him swallow, then a thin, uneven laugh. Then consider tonight the day I finally woke up. A long pause followed. The faint sound of wind drifted through the receiver, then a rustle of paper, before his voice returned, gentler now, trembling. You know, for months I kept thinking you'd call. Every time the phone rang, I thought, maybe she's calmed down. But the longer I waited, the more I realized your silence was the clearest answer. It wasn't punishment. It was a boundary. I never understood that before. I smiled, not sadly, just with a trace of ache. You used to tell me silence was the weapon of the weak. But the truth is, silence is the strength of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Maybe you're right, he murmured. I spent my whole life proving, winning, forcing people to see me. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I forgot the people who needed to be seen by me. He paused again, his next words breaking softly, like confession. I read everything in the box. At first I was angry, furious. I thought you were out for revenge. But when I saw my signature beside your name, my hand started shaking. I've never trembled over money before. Only over shame. I went still. In my mind, I saw the man who once stood in the middle of our living room, barking orders with absolute certainty, now trembling not from rage, but from shame. It was an image I'd never dared to imagine. Maybe for the first time in your life, I said slowly, you know what it feels like to lose control. He let out a soft laugh, followed by a faint cough. Yeah, it's strange, like walking through a familiar room after the lights go out. But you know what's stranger, Clara? When you stop trying to control everything, you start hearing more. Other people's voices, and your own. I was quiet for a moment. Beneath the porch, the river lapped gently against the dock steady, like the long, slow breath of night itself. Dad, I said, things can collapse, yes. But I never wanted to see you lose everything. I just wanted you to finally see who you really are, not the version you built for everyone else. I know, he answered, his voice catching slightly. And you should know your mother still doesn't understand. She called me weak, said I was pathetic for calling you. But I didn't call to ask you to come back. I just wanted you to know the day you left, I didn't just lose a daughter, I lost the best part of myself. I closed my eyes. A single drop fell from the roof, breaking in the cold tea beside me. The best part of you is still there, I said quietly. You just never learned how to keep it. There was silence on the line. Then the sound of wind, and a long exhale, as if you were finally putting down something heavy. If I ever came to see you, he said softly, would you open the door? I looked out toward the river, where a distant ship's light shimmered on the surface like a heartbeat. If you bring coffee, I said, my voice light as the breeze. And not a folder full of loan papers, maybe. He chuckled. A rough, tired but genuine sound, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard since my mother was alive. Coffee, he repeated. All right, no files, no money, just coffee. I think I can manage that. Another silence followed, not heavy this time, but soft, like the first light of morning. I'll let you rest, he said. Thank you for listening. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Dad, I interrupted gently, this isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to listen. The call ended with a quiet exhale, and the screen went dark, leaving me alone with the sound of crickets, the water's rhythm, and a space so vast it almost hummed. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly, not from anger, not from fear, but because something inside me had just melted, like the last layer of ice finally cracking open. I looked out at the river. The ripples caught the light like scattered shards of glass. For the first time, I didn't see my father's reflection there. I saw myself, a woman learning to forgive, not because anyone deserved it, but because I was tired of carrying the past on my back. The wind off the river carried the faint scent of coffee from somewhere unseen, warm, rich, tender. I smiled. Maybe, somewhere out there, a man was really brewing a cup of coffee, and for the first time in his life, not alongside a plan. 3 months later, Charleston had turned to spring. The sky glowed with a honey-colored warmth, the sharp chill of January long gone, replaced by soft winds gliding over the Ashley River and brushing past porches lined with lavender. My little house remained the same, simple, quiet, with a kind of order I never knew I needed. In the mornings, I brewed coffee and set out 2 cups. One for me, one for whoever might come, or perhaps no one at all. Either way, it was a reminder I was ready for things born of kindness, not obligation. Today was the first session of the program I had started, Financial Boundaries for Women. A small class at a community center in the old Charleston district, a renovated warehouse painted white, with wide windows opening to a garden of hydrangeas. The tables were plain but spotless. When I arrived, a few women were already waiting. None of them looked alike, but their eyes shared something: exhaustion and caution. A middle-aged woman in a beige sweater with faint bruises on her arm. An elderly lady with silver hair tucked under a straw hat, clutching a worn purse. A young girl, barely 20, eyes trembling between fear and hope. I recognized every expression, every quiet tremor, because in each of them, I saw a version of myself from years ago. The one who didn't know how to say no, who confused love with obedience, who'd traded peace for approval. I began the class, not with a lecture, but with a story. When I was 26, I said, my voice calm and even. I could read and interpret the financial statements of a corporation, but I couldn't say one simple sentence to the people I loved. I can't help you. I thought I was strong, but really, I was just enduring. No one ever taught me that sometimes saying no is the very first way to love yourself. The room fell quiet. I saw an older woman reach for a tissue and a young girl lower her head, pressing her lips together. I smiled not to comfort them, but to affirm that their softness wasn't shameful. We began to talk about boundaries. I wrote 3 words on the board: money, trust, limits. Then I told them about my mistakes, about the times I signed documents without reading them carefully, about the transfers I made thinking they were acts of love when, in truth, they were born of fear of being disliked. I didn't speak as a teacher, but as someone remembering. Then I asked, who here has ever felt guilty for keeping something for yourself? Several hands went up. One elderly woman said softly, I'm 73, and this is the first time I've kept my pension card in my own wallet. My son called me selfish. The room chuckled, not at her, but out of recognition. I looked at her and nodded. No, you're not selfish. You're just learning how to stop being a bank for everyone else. A younger woman spoke next, her voice trembling. My ex-husband took all my savings. He said if I really loved him, I wouldn't hide anything. Now I don't trust anyone. I walked closer and placed my hand lightly on her table. Trusting others is good, I said. But trusting that you deserve respect is even better. Then I shared a small part of my own story, not names, not details, just a feeling. I once spent years paying debts that weren't mine, 15 years, to be exact. Each time, they said it was family sharing. But no one ever told me that if only one person keeps paying, it stops being a family, it becomes a system of debt. The class stayed silent for a long moment. Some women looked down at the floor, others took deep breaths as if they had just surfaced after holding it for far too long. Then one elderly lady smiled softly, sadly. You're right, she said. Turns out we're not broken for feeling tired of saving everyone else. We're just exhausted. I smiled back, a real one. And exhaustion doesn't mean you're broken. It only means you've done too much, for too many, while forgetting yourself. The session ran for over 2 hours. By the time it ended, the afternoon sun had tilted through the windows, painting the room in gold. A woman came up to me and took my hand. I never realized money was tied to self-respect, she said. I replied, money is a tool. But the way we let others touch it reflects how we allow them to touch our lives. In the following weeks, the class grew fuller. Word spread about the financial coach who connects money with courage. One afternoon, a reporter came to interview me. She asked how it felt to go from millionaire investor to personal finance teacher. I smiled and said, it feels lighter when you no longer have to prove anything. Making money never set me free, knowing how to keep it, for the right person myself did. 1. After they left, I stood alone on the community center porch, watching the sunset spill across the river. The salt wind brushed past, carrying the faint scent of coffee from a nearby cafe, the same scent that brought back that night's phone call. I closed my eyes and smiled. Maybe somewhere in Boston, my father was sitting in a small cafe with a cup of coffee, no files, no paperwork, just the quiet warmth of a man relearning how to be a father. And I, the woman who once believed her worth came from saving others, now sat here, teaching others how to save themselves. No fame, no spotlight, just truth and breath. But in that simplicity, I found something I had lost long ago, myself. That night, before sleeping, I wrote the final line in my journal, the same message I want to leave for those listening to this story. I once thought freedom meant walking away from everyone. But now I know true freedom is staying in this world and keeping your heart intact. I turned off the light. The night wind drifted through the window, brushing softly against my cheek. I smiled in the dark, no longer the runaway, no longer the one paying the price. I was simply Clara, the woman who finally understood that sometimes the most beautiful revenge is to live well, live quietly, and need no one's apology.